There
you go. What do you say?
I said, how the Rambam describes Pshat and Avdus, Avadim, the idea of Avadim and Mar Nevuchim?
I'm familiar, but I don't remember what.
Basically, I think it's the concept of, Hashem allowed for such a zach because that was the normal, that was what was, accepted in the world at the time. He explains a lot of things that way, like carbonos and other things. He says this was, he built the what's accepted and not accepted around the, ideas of what was accepted and developed at the time.
I hear. That's interesting. That's, yeah. I'm not sure I understand that either too well. Yeah. Okay, let's see tonight's stuff, which is also not easy to understand. Lots of things that are not easy to understand. We're up to the Mishnah, right? Mishnah Kuf Gimel on the base. So we're actually an Amud behind, half Amud behind. Okay, so continuing with this, what does it mean when somebody, what does a person mean when he has different terminologies for different for different fields, and how much does he really mean to sell? So Mishnah says, base kur offer ani marchalot. He says, I'm selling you a base kur of dirt, mida bechevel, and I'm going to measure it with a rope. Right? Which means I'm giving you a specific amount of a specific size field, no more or no less. And then pichas kol shehu. So then even if he gave him less, Yanaka, then he not even, but if he gave him less than that, then he's allowed to subtract from the price. Meaning, let's say he told him, okay, I'm selling you exactly an acre. I'm gonna measure out that acre, and then the buyer, after paying for it, or before he pays for it, measures it, and it's slightly less than an acre. So then he he subtracts from the price because the agreement was for an exact amount of field. Haiser kol shehu, and if it's too much field, then yasir. Then the guy who bought the field has to give it back. Now we'll see weiter. It means he's going to give it back money, or he gives back the field. Either what not gives back. Either he has to pay more money, or he gives back the field. So that's if he says that he's going to give him an exact measurement. But if he says, I'm selling you this field, whether it's a little bigger, whether it's a little smaller, this guy's much more relaxed. Even if it's less, a quarter of a saw less, or it's more, it's the guy can keep it. Meaning up to a quarter of a saw, which we're going to have to crunch all these numbers in the Gemara. Up to a quarter of a saw, either more or less, is included in the sale. But if it's more than a quarter of a saw, then you have to make a cheshbon, and he has to pay him back because he was given too much by mistake. Mahu masaloi. What does he give him back? Mais, he gives him money. Meaning, what the Mishnah is saying is that the buyer has to pay for the extra land that was given to him. We don't just say, it's the seller's mistake. Okay, so give him back land. No, you don't give him back land. You give him back the money that the land would cost, which we'll see in the Gemara about that. Meaning, he doesn't give him back his land, the extra land, he gives him back the money. But if the seller wants karka, you give him back karka. Right? Meaning, again, we're siding basically with, even though the seller is the one that messed up, and he gave too big a field for what he said he was charging for, still the buyer has to pay for it, and he cannot give him back the land. Right? Okay, and why did they say that he should give him money? Why does the buyer who was given extra land have to give him money for it? Why can't he just give him back the extra land? The yafas koichel shemoicher, to make the koich of the moicher nicer, mean it better. Why? Shem shire besod the base tisha kavin. If there's left over in the field 9 kavin, meaning if all the extra pieces of field that the guy sold added up to 9 kavim, then that's in itself a proper field. All right. So Mamela then at that point he could give back the land. Meaning we're saying that if this buyer was given extra land up until 9 kavim, he has to pay for his extra land. Once it hits 9 kavim, then that's considered a substantial land unto itself, and he could just give back. He can just give him back the land. Ubakina, and then a garden, base chatzi kav, it's a half a kav. A garden, it's a lot less. Divrei Rabbi Kiva, and like Rabbi Kiva said, base roiva, right? And Rabbi Kiva says it's a base roiva. Machsuloy is a karka, then the buyer has to give him back land. Meaning he doesn't have to give him back land; he can pay for it, or he can give him back land. And not only that, but not only does he give back that quarter of a land that he oversold, Ella eskolam ma'aser, then he gives back everything. So this line is a little difficult to understand in the Mishnah, because what the Mishnah is saying is that, and we had this a few blot ago, if a seller sells extra land, gives extra land by mistake. So if it's a small amount, then the buyer has to pay him for it. Right, depending on what his terminology was, but the buyer has to pay it for it. But if he overcharged a lot, not overcharged, he overgave a lot, then the buyer has to give back everything, even the small amounts that he normally doesn't have to give back. Meaning, let's use contemporary numbers. So a guy buys a field that's 1,000 yards, and by mistake the guy gave him a field that is 1,005 yards. So the buyer gets to keep those extra 5 yards, and but he's supposed to pay for it. Fine. Let's say he gave him 1,050 yards. So that's too much. Right, so there he has to. There the buyer, it all goes back to the buyer. But even the first 5 yards, even the first 5 yards are back to him. Right, even though the first 5 yards he should be given for free, if he said that he's just giving him a roundabout number, but still it's not his. He loses the extra 5 yards. Yeah. But it doesn't make sense. The lashon of the Mishnah doesn't make sense. It says v'loyas haroiva bovad, which is the extra quarter, even the meiser. It should be the opposite. Of course, he has to give back the extra. The roiva is the issue. Okay, so again, let's just the chaz of this Mishnah. There's a lot in this Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if the guy sold a field and he said it's going to be measured exact, and then if it ends up not being measured exact either because he gave too much a field or he gave too little, then it goes back. That little extra goes back. However, if he says, I'm giving you this field, whether it's a lot, whether it's a little, then it does not go back unless it's a larger size. Yeah. And okay, fine. So that's the Gemara. So what happens if he said, I'm selling you a base course stomamai? He didn't say, again, there were 2 lashonis in the Mishnah. One lashon in the Mishnah was a rope, which means exact. The other lashon in the Mishnah was, he said beferish, whether it's more or whether it's less. What happens if he just stam said base kur? So what does that mean? Does that mean a specific measurement? Does that mean a loose measurement? Tashema base kur offer ani moichalach. It says in the Mishnah, he says, I'm selling you a base core of dirt. Mida b'chevel, measured by a rope, onto today's daf. So pachas kol shehu yanafil. If it's even a smaller amount than what he said he's giving, which is a base core, then he has to subtract. Yeser kol shehu, and if the field is even the smallest amount bigger, hastama. But then I'm sorry, yeser kol shehu yachser. If it's even a little bit bigger, then it goes back. Hastama, mashma, that if he stam said base core, koyen chaser, kehain chaser, hein yaser dami. That's like chaser and yaser, and therefore, he could waive it and he doesn't have to pay. So that's mashra that way. But then the seifa of him, amarloi hein chaser, hein yaser. But if he says, I'm selling you this field, whether it's a little more, whether it's a little less, even if it's a quarter saw less, or it's more than a roiva saw, he gets to keep it. Mashma, hastama. If he stam said he's selling a base core, kamida b'chevel dami. That's like selling with a mida b'chevel, and it would be exact. So basically, we have conflicting proofs from our Mishnah. So therefore, we cannot make. We have conflicting diukim, so therefore we cannot make. There's no mashmas. Fine.
How is there a diuk from the Sefer to stomach? Once he says the words hein chaser, hein yeser, it's not stomach.
What?
Once he's used the words hein chaser, hein yeser, it's excuse me, it's the same thing as saying a base core exact, but a little bit more or less is okay. And there's no stomach there.
What do you mean? Why not?
Because he said the words hein chaser, hein yeser. Stomach is without saying anything. By definition.
Say he said to him hein chaser, hein yaser. So that means if he stam says base core.
He said base core anyway. Hein chaser, hein yeser. Those are the words he used.
Right. So mashma, if he stamps, he just stopped after base core.
Could be even more.
Well, or it could be not.
You don't have a diak either way. That's my problem. You don't have a diak that says specifically not, which is what the Gemara is asking.
I don't get what you're saying. But all right.
If you can make a diak either way, we can't ask. There's a stira from the diak from the ratio to the sefer.
Right. Why not?
Yeah,
because it's mashma hein chesed hein yasser.
And if he would have just said base core and imaychalach,
that's mashma stam.
That is stam. But what's the mashma from the sefer? It's from the sefer.
It says hein chesed hein yasser. Mashma.
Right.
That if he stopped without saying hein chesed hein yasser.
What came before the hin chaser hin yasser? Base core offer ani moichalach.
That's it.
Hein chaser hin yasser.
Yeah. So.
But if he would just say base core ani moichalach without the offer.
Right.
For all I know, that could be the same thing. There's no diak to say that it's not like that.
I hear. I don't know.
When I'm specific and I add hein chaser hein yasser, then it's a roiva either way. But if I don't say any of it, it's also a roiva either way. Where's the diak to say this?
Yeah. Okay. I hear. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's see back. Just a Tashima, 6 lines down at the top. Base core offer. Again, we're trying to prove if a guy stam says, I'm selling you a field of a base kur, what is the din? So Tashma base kur offer ani meicher loch. The Brisa says, I'm selling you a base kur. Ki base kur offer ani meicher loch. Or he says, like a base kur offer. Hein chaser hein yaser ani meicher loch. Or he says, I'm selling it to you whether it's a lot or a little, meaning there's three different cases here. Afilu pichas roiva l'sa, even if it's less than a sa, or it's more than roiva l'sa, higiu. Right? Then it's his, he gets to keep it. Alma stama, nami, kehein chaser hein yasa dami. So stama is like hein chaser hein yasa. Right? That's what the Brisa said. The Brisa is putting all three cases together. Right? So Gemara says, no, it's not three different cases. Hasan Prushika Mefarish. There, it's explaining the cases. Ezo base kur, shika base kur. What is a base kur that you reference when you say you're selling a field of a base kur? That's, as an example would be when you say whether it's less or whether it's more. Okay, so Maskav Rav Ashi, Imkain, ani moichalach, ani moichalach lamali. If that's the case, why do you? If it's explaining the other case, then why do you need to say ani moichalach, ani moichalach? It sounds like it's two different cases. I mean, that's extra. Again, the Brisa says base kor ofar ani moichalach, kib base kor ofar ani moichalach, hein chaser hein yasa ani moichalach. Why does it keep saying that for? If it's talking about one case, then it shouldn't need to do that. Why do you keep saying ani moichalach? So that's the kasha. Elalav shmami no stama nami kein chaser hein yaser dami. Saying stam is like chaser and yaser. Shmami no, and that's what we paskin. So a guy sells the field stam. That means that there is room for how do you say it? There's a it could be mistaken, meaning there could be by mistake, there could be some added or some taken away.
There's leeway.
Leeway, yeah, very good. Yeah, so very good. There's leeway. He gives you a little bit of leeway, and the field, if he's given too much field, it doesn't need to be given back. And if the seller gives too little field, then doesn't have to subtract. Fine. Then the Gemara says, so then in the case of it's more, if the guy said exact, then he has to give back. Then the buyer has to give it back. He has to give it back to the seller. Now, what does he have to give back? So the Mishnah says he has to give back money. What's a pshat? Why does he have to give back money? Let's say he wants to give back the land to the seller. So Gemara says, what are you saying? That you want to strengthen the koyach of the seller, right? That's what you want to do. Meaning, why? Because if let's say it's he overgave a little bit of land, so the buyer's going to give him that little bit of land. What's it going to do? What's he going to do with this little bit of land? Nothing. Gives him a phone booth. What's he going to do with a phone booth? Right, or a phone booth size. So therefore, he has to pay him for it. And the buyer, since it's connected to his field, so then it'll work. So Gemara says, we're doing this to strengthen the koyach of the seller. But do we not say, are we not concerned about strengthening the buyer? If the seller said, I'm giving you the case, I'm giving you the base kur, plus or minus. And he ended up giving 7.5 kur less than a base kur, which is essentially a quarter of a kav. Or he added on 7.5 kav. Then he gets to keep it, meaning both ways. The sale works, whether it's bad for the buyer or whether it's bad for the seller. But if it's more than that, we force the seller to sell the extra land, and the buyer to buy it. Right? Which means that the seller doesn't have a right to keep that field. Once he sold the extra, So that's it. So the same way we can force the seller to sell the car, not the car, the karka. So or really the buyer, we force the buyer to buy it. So we also can force the seller to sell it, depending on whether he gave too much or gave too little. Bottom line is, we do see that we're concerned for the buyer. We're not only concerned for the seller. I mean, again, in the beginning, we were thinking that the seller's rights are the ones that we're makbid on, because we don't want him to be handed back a little field that he could do nothing with. And now we see that the buyer's hands are also, we're trying to be mechazik the buyer too. So when it says hasam, you're going to have a yakirame korabazol hashta. In that case, right, when we said that we make the seller sell the field, that's talking about where the field was worth a lot of money and now it got cheaper. Real estate prices tanked. Right? Because then we tell the seller, obviously, we say if you want to give, which should be lay, right? But if you gave him land, have like kazula the hash to give him at this price. Right? Meaning what we're saying is that since the price is tanked, so what do you want to do? You want to force the buyer to pay. I mean, he gave the buyer extra land. What happened here? The seller gave the buyer extra land, right? And now the price is tanked. So we're saying to the buyer, you have to pay for the extra land. Maybe yes, but if you do, you're going to get it at the price of now. You're not going to have to pay the price. Let's say you bought it a year ago and they just realized this discrepancy now. And now the price is tanked. We're not going to make the buyer pay for the old price of which he really bought the field for. He can buy the extra field that was given to him, but he pays the prices nowadays. Right? And Mamela, but again, he has the choice. The choice in the Hava meeting, we thought that the buyer has the choice. And now we're saying, no, the buyer does not have the choice. The seller has the choice. The Gemara asks, we have a brisa that says when he gives him the money, when he gives him the land, when the seller gives the buyer the land, gives him based on the price right now, which is mashra, even if the price is tanked, the guy has to buy at the prices now. So my answer is no. Hasam, you're going to have a soilame karba, it's the opposite. There, when he has to pay, is talking about where the prices were cheap and now they went up. And there also the seller loses out. The seller can't say, I want you to pay the price that it's worth now. No, because he gave the extra land when the prices were cheaper. Therefore, the only price that the buyer is mechuyev to pay is the cheaper price. Okay, fine. Jim Shire the base test comment. So we said meaning there's a certain leeway, right, that you give that the buyer gets to keep if the seller messed up. But once it gets to be a certain amount, so then once it gets to more than 9 kavim, so then the buyer can say he doesn't want the field and he could give all the fields back to the seller. So the test comment, it's even a bika gedola, meaning is 9 kavim on a scale or is it specific? Meaning, let's say you sold a guy 100 acres of land. So, and the seller gave 9 kavim extra. That's really nothing in ratio to what the guy bought. So do we still say, no, you're allowed to give it back to him? Or do we say, no, it works in a ratio? So Rav Huna says it does not work in a ratio. 9 kavim is a hard cap. If he gives extra 9 kav extra of land, no matter how much land was bought, the buyer can give back the land. Rav Nachman says no, it goes on a scale. Nice and shiva kavan umetzel l'chol kur v'kur. You give 7.5 to each kur. On top of beis v'ika milsa yisera. We're doing all the toises tonight stuff, right? V'ika milsa yisera. Then the tishas kavan, and if there's anything more that to bring it to more than 9 kavim hadri, then it goes back. Right? Meaning it's on a sliding scale.
What's between 7.5 and 9?
What's the difference between 7.5 and 9?
Now, what happens between those two? That's also chayzer.
Didn't we say that it's 7.5 and 9? It's really the same thing. It's just dependent on what you're measuring. Something like that.
Well, here, we
says
seem to
that.
be measuring the same thing here.
Right.
I mean, the first part of the Mishnah said Raiva. Now we changed to Tishikabin.
Right. No, we changed it already before. The previous brisa.
No, in our Mishnah, I'm saying, in our Mishnah.
Yeah. It's still, the Rashbam says it's a Raiva L'Sa.
Tishikabin is not Raiva L'Sa.
No, 7.5.
Right. So in our Mishnah, what happens between 7.5 and 9? The Mishnah says more than 7.5 yachzer, and now we're saying 9 yachzer.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure. But anyways, it's a machlokes of Nachman and Rav Huna whether it goes on a sliding scale or not. So the Gemara, I mean, I think that's the right way to say it. No. Right. For a base kur, it's 9 kavim. Yeah, but that's the baseline, and then it'll adjust. I don't think it'll adjust lower, it'll only adjust higher. I think. Okay. Anyway, so Esvei Rav Nachman, second line down. So Esvei Rav Nachman, Rav asked the Kasha Rav Nachman, Shim Shir Basada base Tisha Kavim, if you leave over in the field 9 kavim, right? So he has to give back. We said the buyer has to give back all the land, unless the seller wants to sell it to him. Lav Dezavan Le Kurayim, isn't this talking about where it was 2 kur? Right? Now, I don't know what the Havamina is, but I'm having a hard enough time understanding just the Shakalatariya. But for whatever reason, the Gemara thinks it's 2 kur. Why do the Gemara think it's 2 kur? Right? Whatever it is, the Gemara is thinking it's 2 kur and it's 9 kav.
Because it switched to Sada Stam. Until now, we've been dealing with base kur. Here, this is just Sada.
And a Stam Sada is 2 kur?
No, but Stam Sada could be even 2 kur. Why not?
He's saying it's even. I mean, it's
Stam Sada is a base
Sada. It should be included in that.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Very good. I hear that. So anyways, the Gemara is saying, so L'chara could be 2 base kur, yet the number stays the same. Right? So he says, Loi does Avan like kur. The Gemara answers somewhere where he bought a kur. Then the Gemara asks from the Gina, Ubegina base Chatzikav. And we said a Gina is a half a kav. Lav does Avan like Sasayim. Isn't that talking about where he sold 2 saw? Right? Which case the half a kav is only going to be a quarter of a kav. Right? So that's a kashan of Nachman. So we say, Lloyd, the Zavan Le saw. Somewhere where he only sold him a saw. So then it works. Fine. Then the Gemara asks the third kasha. The end of the Mishnah. Base Roiva, it says base Roiva. My love, the Zavan Le saw. Isn't it talking about a saw? So my answer is like the Zaman Lechatzi saw. It's talking about a half a saw. Right? He only sold him a half a saw. Okay, those are the kashas. Fine. Now this next part, these next few lines get a little easier. What?
There is no ratio to that. It's not relative to the value.
I wish I could crunch the numbers.
Well, a base saw, we allow a roiva. a roiva to a base saw, that's allowed. Now we're saying twice that is not allowed.
Right.
So if you translate that to a kur, 7.5 kav we allow. Twice that would be 15, but we're saying 9.
So what are you saying? So it's less?
This ratio seems to get exponentially smaller as it gets bigger. As the piece of land gets bigger, the return policy gets smaller.
As it gets bigger, return. I hear. Well, that's the machlokes. So you're saying that it gets smaller.
This is like neither of Huna or Ramat anymore. Now we're saying in Rabbi Akiva, the allowance is a quarter, right? He's telling him a half a saw. So it's an eighth of a saw would be the allowance.
Right.
And a half a saw is twice that, where it's yasser.
Yeah.
But by a kur, the allowance is 7.5 kav, and the return is not double, it's 9.
But that's because that's the minimum.
So if the minimum by a saw is twice the allowance, then the minimum by a kur should also be twice the allowance. Should be 15. If we're going with the same ratio.
Right. I hear. Not sure. I'm not sure. I don't understand it enough to Where's Akiva for all this? Yeah. All right. Fine. Let's see. The rest of the daf is a little easier. So Boy Rav Ashi. So again, we said that there's different fields. There's a sadeh, and then there's, according to Rabbi Akiva, then there's also a garden, right? So Boy Rav Ashi. Sadeh v'nasas gina. Let's say it's a field and it became a garden. Gina v'nasas sadeh. It's a garden and then became a field. What's the din? Right, meaning which because it's for a gina, it's much less. The mistake could be much less, right? So now you took the field and you made it into a gina. So do we go with the measurements of a garden, which it is now, or do we go with the measurements of a field, or the opposite? So take the Gemara says take. So we're all machavan to this Gemara, right? Yeah, Tana. So we're saying this just to try and clarify it a little bit. We're saying that when the seller sells a field and he gives too much, so then the buyer should pay for it, but not give him back the karka, because the karka is going to do nothing for him. What's he going to do with a tiny little piece of land, the seller? So Tana, but if that little extra was next to a field that he kept, that the seller kept, then afilu kolshu machziloi karka. Then if it's even a kolshu, we can give it back. Why? Because he could attach it to his existing field. I mean, the reason why we don't want, meaning the reason why we don't require this, we tell the seller he has no choice. The buyer, he has no choice. He has to buy the field, and we don't give him the option of giving it back. That is because what is the seller going to do with this little tiny field? But if the seller retains some field for himself, then this little field that he gave extra connects itself, and then it's all good, right? So fine. So the Gemara says, so that's a way out of the buyer. The buyer can give back the field if the seller has a field connected to it. Now Gemara asks a bunch of kashas. So Boy Rav Ashi, bar mahu shetafsik. What happens if there's a bar in between the seller's other land and this little piece? Amasamayim mahu shetafsik. What about if there's water in between? Derech harabim mahu shetafsik. Let's say it's on the other side of the street. Richva dedikla mahu shetafsik. What happens if there's a palm palm trees separating it. So now do we say that that's the seller's tough luck? Something separating it, separating. Or do we say no? What is the seller supposed to do with this tiny little land that's across the street from his other lands? Or on the other side of the bar?
Wouldn't that be like he didn't have a piece of land?
That's the Gemara's Shiloh. Right? That's the Gemara's Shiloh. I guess theoretically he could buy out the street maybe, or he can fill in the bar. I mean, he could do something. Whose tough luck is it? So we say take him. Fine. The last line of the Mishnah said, not only the roiva, but anything extra. Yeah, klape laya. It should be the opposite, meaning you have this leeway or this buffer that the buyer gets to keep. Then we said, but if he's given too much, then the buyer loses everything. So really what it should say, right? Really what it should say is that the buyer loses the bonus, and not only does he lose the bonus, he even loses, meaning the extras, but he even loses his extra that he normally could keep. Meaning once we say that he has to give back land, he has to give back everything, even the land that normally he'd be able to keep. Meaning keep the change. Right? That's a good mashal. I think it's a good mashal. I mean, somebody says to you, keep the change. And because he thinks that the change is a nickel, a dime, and then he finds out that to keep the change, oh no, the change was $50. So we're saying, well, can he keep the nickel or dime, or does he have to give back all the change? So the Mishnah is saying he has to give back all the change. So the proper way to say it is that you give back the extra, and not only that, but the nickel and the dime he also has to give back. That would be the way to say it. The Mishnah doesn't say it that way. The Mishnah says he has to give back the nickel and the dime, and not only that, he has to give back all the extra. It doesn't make sense. That's the Gemara's kasha. Klape laya. It should be the opposite. So the Gemara says the teretz, yes. So let it say the opposite. Tani Rabban bar Rav Nachman. Not only does he give the extra, then he has to, meaning we switch it. He not only does he have to give back the extra, he also has to give back even the quarters that he normally is allowed to keep. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop over here. It was not an easy daf, in case anybody's having chalisha sadas like I am, but it was not easy.